Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming and talking about My Hero Academia chapter 349. I'm still a little ill, so I'm probably going to make this a relatively short video. I don't know. I also want to talk about one thing in the chapter, because this is one of my favorite type of chapters when I was really thinking about it. So yeah, we'll see how long the video goes, but hey, I hope everyone's having a good day. I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, and yeah, let's get into it. I guess the best spot to start would be with the general notes. The chapter was a setup chapter. I'm just looking at the color page right now. It's interesting that the color page was Bakugo and Mirko and they don't actually show up in the chapter, but it's a cool looking color page. Just trying to think about how to properly do this. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about my favorite part. So the cool thing about this chapter is that it lets us do something that I really enjoy that you guys are probably not going to enjoy, but it lets us play the game of what was the author thinking. I personally really like this kind of stuff. Because of what exactly happens and, well, what exactly the chapter is. So I think we could all agree that the chapter is a setup chapter, because when you look at it, not a lot's really happening. It's more of, hey, this is what's going to happen next week. Like, even when you look at Ochako and the Toga stuff, you have like Toga talking about twice, so it's like, okay, I'm setting up that there's going to be twice. And then when you go to Dabi, well, Dabi's just flat out, hey, I'm going to tell you about what happened in my past. So it's full on a setup chapter. Now the thing here is that a setup chapter in this situation is a very conscious choice. And so what you end up having here, like, I'm going to bring up some terminology, but like just use it for the context of this video. It doesn't have to be the correct thing in the wider context, but I think that with this occurring, the setup chapter is significant because there's a lot of conscious thought that goes into it. One doesn't just have many fighting chapters and all of a sudden stop stuff to set things up for the future. What I think is happening here is pretty much that we have shifted from one phase of the fight to the next, and the setup chapter is like the boundary of the two phases. And I'll explain more about this, because what this will ultimately do is that it kind of gives us an idea of how exactly the author might be structuring things. Now the thing here is that, you know, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be looking at the past and be trying to fit everything that we've seen so far into one coherent idea, one coherent theme for the Hero Academia stuff, or for this arc. Now the thing is here that the author has created things in such a way that we could build a idea for the previous chapters, like a theme that they were following. So in this case, the idea would be, after seeing this setup chapter, it seems like the previous phase was the battlefield setup phase. And what I mean by that is, when you look at the previous chapters and you look at the fights that actually took place in them, we actually had the Bakugo side and the Toga side. What seems to have occurred, it seems that the author's first phase here was establishing the battlefields and the little wrinkles within them. So the battlefields that we had the big focus on, well, the Shigaraki battlefield, you had to establish the wrinkle of, well, what's going to happen now that Izuku isn't actually there? And then you have that battlefield being set up. You have the exposition for the battlefield. You learn its UA. You learn about all the measures that they've taken for Shigaraki. So you have battlefield exposition. So that's the battlefield setup. When you go to the Toga battlefield, and maybe the Toga battlefield is the more blatant one. When you go to that battlefield, you have the very strong exposition about, like, okay, this place is so far away from Japan, you know, it's a theme park. Lots of unnecessary details, but it makes sense within the context of explaining this battlefield. And the wrinkle in that battlefield is that Izuku is there, so the author has to set up, well, this is how this battlefield is going to kind of work. And then you have to move Izuku out of there to properly set up the battlefield. Now, the thing is, when you look at this from the perspective of battlefield setups, it justifies why Dabi and All For One don't really show up. Sorry if I was out of frame there. Now the reason there is that there's no real big wrinkles occurring in the All For One battlefield and the Dabi battlefield. You only need to show them a little bit, and there's no other like, but then, or, you know, but this little thing, or like there's a giant hand monster no one can have predicted. So when you look at it from the battlefield perspective, everything makes sense there. So when you look at it from the perspective of establishing wrinkles, it makes sense why we didn't have All For One have an expanded thing during that first phase, is because there's nothing else really to elaborate there. Then when you look at the Ochako side and Bakugo side, we also didn't progress too much on either front. It was again establishing what the final form of those battlefields were going to look like for the next phase. And so what is going to be the next phase? Well, you know, a few weeks ago we were talking about the author maybe doing the One Piece strategy of keeping Izuku away from the battlefields to have everyone else have the fights. With this week, with this setup chapter, it does seem like the second phase of this situation, and again, we're calling it a phase, but just, you know, bear with me. The second phase of the situation seems to be Izuku traveling. So, what's going to occur, likely, or at least in my idea, is that Izuku's going to be flying while everyone else is having their fights. So this is going to be called, you know, we can call it just flat out the Izuku travel phase, where everything else gets sorted out. Now, the thing here is, with this chapter, it's possible that the author telegraphed what things are going to be occurring within that phase. Toga versus Ochako, maybe Spinner's stuff, because you have Dabi talking about Spinner, we see him, and maybe more Shigaraki versus the team. Of course, we don't see All For One here, and my first guess would be that All For One doesn't show up, because All For One might not be at the same level of a fight as Toga. So if I was to look at this next phase here, seeing how the authors set things up, I would say that for the Izuku travel phase, you have those three fights occurring, and possibly All For One's fight happens at the end of the phase. So we don't really get to see all of it until the end, and then the author can kind of play around with it. So I would expect to see Toa get finished. I'd expect to see Spinner get finished. I'd expect to see Bakugo's portion to get completed, and of course Dabi's portion as well, because he's leading next week. And then as we're approaching the end of the second phase, that will probably be where Izuku arrives at UA and maybe uses like the second quirk to blast a majority of the hand monster away, because it looks like it's going to be a blast quirk. And then we have maybe All For One wrinkles at the very end. Speaking of wrinkles, that's the next big thing here. You know, we're talking about a very simple setup of Izuku's going to be traveling and everyone else finishes their fights while Izuku is traveling. You might say, like, Trip, isn't that a relatively basic structure? And it's like, yeah, no, it's a super basic structure. It's the structure that Shonen Jump seems to love. But the thing is that the author is super basic, especially with certain parts of Hero Academia. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm also super basic. The thing is, fundamentally, the hero belongs in the climax, and the climax belongs near the end. It's very hard to actually deviate from this structure, especially because it's a shonen magazine. You need to keep the excitement. And when you look at Hero Academia, the thing is, the author is super basic because he's been basic before. He's also been not basic. So you have, you know, like there's a healthy percentage that you get some wrinkles here. But just to give you the quick rundown, Overhaul's arc is super basic, because when you look at Overhaul's arc, Izuku is kept away from Overhaul. And in the time it takes for Izuku to reach Overhaul, you have the Sun Eater fight, which is a critical fight. You have the Kirishima fight, which is a critical fight. You have Mirio against the world, which is a critical fight. You even have Ochako finishing up Rikia for the first round, technically. But, you know, Ochako was in a critical fight because the author doesn't care about Ochako. But you see the point there in the Overhaul fight. 100%. Izuku is kept away from the villain until the very end, and he shows up. Another arc that is also super basic was Joint Training, which also, I think, was just a sign of how aware the author was of things, because Joint Training is very technically competent. But with Joint Training, Izuku's at the end of all the fights. The one other person who's really important for the arc is at the beginning, at the end. Izuku's kept at the end because he has all the plot significance, and he's the one that brings the climax to an otherwise low-stakes arc. So ultimately, when we're looking at the phases, saying that that the next phase is going to be the Izuku travel phase, and that the majority of people are going to get their fights sorted out during this phase, there's a pretty good shot there, because that is the author's strategy. Again, might be a few little wrinkles there towards the end. All For One might be the one bringing in the wrinkles. Like when we go to All For One, we might be seeing him actually destroy things. But given that the author didn't focus on All For One in the first phase, it seems to indicate there won't be any significant wrinkle going on with All For One. So we should just be expecting the regular All For One shenanigans. Now, what exactly is going to happen at the third phase? That's kind of a little bit harder. At the third phase is where things should be getting worse, even with Izuku showing up. The other thing the author could do is that the third phase starts with things getting worse, and then like Izuku spends a lot of the third phase also traveling. The reality is we still need to see Plan B, but right now this seems to be the let's get rid of the excess members of the League of Villains. Like Dabi's not going to survive the second phase. I highly doubt it. Like the only way for Dabi to survive second phase is for him to not be showcased in a fight at all. Anyway, that was the general notes real quick. That's what I think is going to happen. This is just really fun. I think this is probably the structure the author is going to go with. What I'm going to be really excited about to see is whether or not we actually see the characters having their fights, specifically Toga Spinner, having their fights during this phase, and then everything ending off when Izuku arrives at UA. We'll have to see if we go there. But yeah, at the very least, when we look at the previous chapters, I think it's pretty clear that that was battlefield setup, because those chapters were dedicated to explaining what's happening in the battlefield that Izuku's not at, and what's happening in the battlefield that Izuku's at, and then moving him out of there to properly establish the battlefield. Alright, so yeah, let's do the page-by-page walkthrough. Page 2 and 3. It's a funny, nice little page where we see Izuku flying. We have Izuku using Fajin and Float. It's cool to see it. I like seeing the bird freak out. Page 4, 5, and 6 leads us into, hey guys, yo, second user's quirk is crazy. Now, there is something a little bit funny about this whole thing with second user's quirk. Let me just reread these pages to make sure I'm about to make the right criticism. Okay, so I was just rereading this. This is a little bit different in the fan translation, because like it seems that the way that the user makes it sound like Izuku tried to use the second user's quirk, but like that wasn't what was in the fan translation. Anyway, the general setup is, yo, bro, like my thing is going to destroy things. It's a dangerous power. The thing is, I think it's silly to say that Izuku can't use it. Like, I understand that it grew in strength and it's a particularly unique power, but this rhetoric seems to ignore the fundamental truth of one for all. And what's even funnier is that the symbol of one for all is even shown in the picture. But okay, so I'm gonna just quickly say, I have no problem with this guy telling Izuku, like, hey man, do not use my power like just willy-nilly like that. It is dangerous, bro. It will kill people. It is unique. But again, it says it's all about it evolving in strength. It grew in strength, right? The thing is, one for all is based around the idea of training wheels. One for all, if there is one thing that Izuku has shown repeatedly, is that every power in one for all can be controlled to be exceedingly weak. We all remember that image of Black Whip coming out like a fizzle from Izuku because of how weak it was. What I'm trying to say is, it's silly to be bringing up the dangers of the max potential when one for all as a power is based around locking things up and limiting the power output. Especially with full cowling, which is Izuku's ultimate training wheel set. Like, it fundamentally doesn't work. This shouldn't be a conversation. Flat out, Izuku should be able to exert like a 1% of the second user's quirk, unless you're going to say the second user's quirk is either 0 or 100. And if it's 0 or 100, like why? Why is that quirk the only 0 or 100 quirk? When everyone else's, Izuku has shown that he can just squeeze out a tiny little bit of it. Even with Danger Sense looks like it has 100% that Izuku hasn't used before. One that we might have seen during the war. So that's the only thing here that I find a little bit weird. It might need a little bit more clarification. It's just, fundamentally, you shouldn't be scared about the maximum power of this thing when One for All and Izuku have shown that he can exert like 1% of the quirks within it. Like, thematically, it just clashes with the spirit of One for All in Izuku's hands. Mind you, it's good hype up. It's just, I think that unless there's actually an issue of using the quirk, Izuku should be able to squeeze out 1%. And if Izuku isn't able to squeeze out 1%, is it because Izuku hasn't trained? So, like, you also aren't letting Izuku train the power? How is Izuku ever going to be able to use it safely? If you keep treating that power as a last resort, how is Izuku ever going to be able to use it in the way that he uses Black Whip, moderating it? So it seems like there's a self-fulfilling prophecy here, and this guy isn't letting Izuku train it. I think it's a little bit strange. It works for the setup of like this is going to be amazing, but I do find it's a little bit strange. You shouldn't be keeping Izuku away from a power just because you think it's too situational. Izuku should be training it somewhere else. Mind you, he didn't have that many days, but like again, it goes back to like why didn't you let him try it out in deserted areas? The other issue is just really with the attempt to use my meta ability. Just because it's hard to actually see if Izuku did it or if that's some mistranslation or something like that. Anyway, it's not a big deal. It's just like it's a hype panel, but like I think fundamentally it messes with the rhetoric of One for All. Okay, I'm looking at the Suyu Ochako pages. The fan translation had a slightly different thing for Suyu, but Suyu's line of "I can't stand the thought of a secret my friend holds dear" being revealed like that. I assume she's talking about Ochako's secrets, right? Because like, who else is holding a secret here? It's just kind of weird to like be talking about this because it's like she's implying that Toga would have told Izuku that Ochako loves him or something. That's kind of just a weird little line there, unless I'm misreading it because I'm sick. Anyway, ultimately, Toga just says on page 7 that she just wants to be irresponsible. She wants to be held to no consequences. The most significant thing on page 9 is that it looks like Ochako's about to go gunhead martial arts on Toga, so yeah, whatever. Page 9, we have the kaiju. It looks pretty cool, honestly, that Nomu. We have the whole raging flames, and yeah, there's nothing really else here. Like, again, this battlefield wasn't significant. There's no real wrinkles. It's just people fighting. So, again, thematically, it makes sense with what we see in the previous chapters. There wasn't anything to really set up here. It's just Dabi going crazy. So, on page 10 is where I have to, like, say props to Ken Smith. Ken Smith was a commenter that was saying that, nah, man, like, Ida's not going to be able to actually get anywhere near Dabi because his engines. I'm thinking, like, maybe Ida has more heat resist nowadays, right? But no, I was completely wrong. This was unfortunate. So, what the author did here first is that he set up, well, Ida's not going to be able to get into the fight easily. If he gets into the fight, it's going to be during one critical instance kind of thing. On page 11, we also see some weirdness of Dabi flying. That's not the weird part. We see that the Endeavor sidekicks are here. So what I really love about the Endeavor sidekicks is that they were legitimately here to support Shoto in the way they support Endeavor. That is such a cool idea. I really love it. It was great for me. And so we also have just Kido talking about what he is with Endeavor and all about the trajectory alteration. What I found really interesting was that Kido gets to have a face reveal. That kind of stuff is so significant. I don't really ever see minor characters getting face reveals, but it really shows just like the author wants to do certain heroes, but he doesn't get the opportunity to. Never did I think I needed a Kido face reveal. Is it actually significant? I don't know, but here we are. One thing that comes out during page 12 is that the Endeavor sidekicks actually really respect Endeavor. So this is again an issue about, and we've talked about this early on, whether or not they would leave him, but it does seem like flat out, the Endeavor sidekicks respect the professional Endeavor. Like they understand how dangerous the world is without Endeavor in it. So this is another situation of just really, this is a nuanced view. These guys are like making a very specific calculation here. That being that they believe in Endeavor, the one that trained them, and are willing to, you know, accept that he was a terrible person to his family and hopefully move forward from that. I do like that Burning calls him an old fart. I do know that the author said that Endeavor, he was able to draw him as an old fart, so like I really think Burning's kind of channeling the author on that one. Now, what's actually really interesting when you look at Burning's dialogue in the official translation is that she calls Endeavor an old fart, but then she goes on to say that that he handed off 3 junior stinkers. So even that is indicative of Burning saying that she wants to be like Endeavor when she grows up. Not the familial abuse Endeavor, but like Endeavor the hero. Just with the junior stinkers comment. Now, page 13 is a page that I think was really funny on the author's part. The first half of page 13, there's nothing really big about it other than Shoto reminding everyone for the last time that he's here because he wants to be here. He's not here because Endeavor asked him to. He just wants to deal with the family thing. I think that's fine. I think that's clear. All for One is the one that's been saying that Endeavor forced Shoto into this kind of situation, but All for One's been dead wrong. All for One tends to be dead wrong when he's mocking people. What's actually really interesting on this part is the way the author goes into Dabi's conversation. The war is all about the people involved. It's not the mindless soldiers following orders who are the real movers and shakers. What's actually really cool about that line is that the author specifically talks about the Nomu. He specifically juxtaposed that line on a Nomu. That was so clever, because it's like, yeah, no, there are Nomu here, so he's addressing the issue of the Nomu. Like, yeah, no. The Nomu are just foot soldiers. The mindless soldiers. The thing is, you understand what Dabi's trying to do. He's trying to set up that, hey, it's about the critical players. But the way the rhetoric works, it doesn't actually go there. The Nomu are one thing, but the majority of the villains are just background characters, right? So when it's mindless soldiers, he's not just referring to the Nomu, he's also referring to every nameless villain that got beat up at USJ that's just there. They're not actually the movers or shakers. And so when you're looking at the people involved, like, this is such a it's such an interesting line, because the people involved, the distinction isn't just on the Nomu and everyone else. It's just flat out, it's the League of Villains. It's just a few critical people leading the charge. This feels like the great man in history theory. Anyway, well, the thing about Dabi here is that he just flat out lines things up for us. He's the author's greatest framing device here. I just think it's such a cool way of just saying that only a few people matter and no one else does. And I think it's such a cool way of saying it directly to the reader. Now, the only thing here is that with the way that Dabi talks, he encompasses too many people. It's not everyone that's got feeling and urges that start firing off. They're not the real movers and shakers. Only a select few have the feelings and urges. In this case, Toga, Spinner, Shigaraki. What's interesting is that he doesn't bring up All for One, but that might be part of the author's framing device. We need to see if All for One actually gets a long, critical battle, or if he gets updates in the next phase. Again, I thought the author did a really good thing. I thought this little segment was really good for page 13. On page 14, we see Spinner for the first time. I do have some thoughts about Spinner here. I'll just say flat out, though, that what the author did is he set up two conditions. Some want to change the world they live in, or destroy the warped imbalances built up over time that we just came to accept. The thing is, there's three characters, and the author only has two conditionals here. So Toga's the one that wants to change the world, and Shigaraki's the one that wants to destroy, with Spinner pretty much... Spinner is so transient that he just kind of goes to whoever. He's a follower. He's said he's a follower. The thing here is, this is one of those spots where it shows you that the author didn't really build up the villains. The reason I say that is because this technique specifically of the some want to do this, some want to do the others, others yet want to do another thing. That's a technique that actually appears a lot in manga, and it's a very quick technique that authors use to establish the differences within an otherwise similar grouping of characters. This is one of those spots where you see the failings of the author's setup for these characters, or it's just not even the failings. It's just like it's the trick of working with Spinner. In a light novel, the authors love doing this because this is something that differentiates a group of characters. This is also a lot of times used as a technique to give exposition to different factions in the world. So it's a little bit unfortunate when you can't do it fully symmetrical. But again, Spinner himself is such a hard character to work with when it comes to this, because he is a follower. He is a gigantic loser in this regard. Now, speaking of Spinner, we do have the issue here that Spinner looks a little bit more buff, and he's also got drool falling out of his mouth. I'm a little bit concerned here. I really hope that it's drugs and not that he got jammed with a second quirk that's making him go kind of Nomu-ish. Fingers crossed that he still has some significance here. The other thing I'm kind of concerned about is that Spinner didn't show up in the previous chapters, and now he's just here. I'm worried about whether or not Spinner was forgotten. And, like, all due respect to the author, he has been very candid about when he's forgotten stuff. We know that he screwed up the Dabi timeline and had to apologize for it on Twitter. We know that he's forgotten Skeptic before. We know that Ryukyu has really weird treatment. I'm very concerned about this whole situation with Spinner. I hope Spinner wasn't forgotten and just slotted in here. If Spinner is at a location where... Okay, if Spinner is at a location where heroes were teleported to, I think it's very, very clear that Spinner was forgotten during the other spots. But if Spinner is in a different location where no heroes were teleported to, which means he was in a location that the heroes didn't plan out, then that means he was never there at the situation with Shigaraki. I hope that is the case, because otherwise this doesn't look good. Anyway, on the bottom of page 14, you have Dabi talking about the limits of superhero society. That's like pretty much all the villains. I agree. This is the limits of superpowered society, because superpowered society still does not know how to deal with mental quirkiness. So yeah, this is the limitation. But the thing is, the heroes aren't going to be able to do anything about it. I've always said this. The heroes are the stopgap. The heroes are the people that allow society to grow. Because the heroes are around, society has the opportunity to continue growing. The issue is, if society was growing towards the wrong direction, and it was, All Might brought in the era of complacency. Society needs to be growing in the right direction for the heroes to actually be super effective here. So this is a big shakeup that hopefully changes the trajectory for superhero society. Anyway, on page 15, a commenter, Jason Thomas, kept pointing out that Dabi's drawing doesn't seem like it's finished. And I think given the way I think it's possible that the author's deadline came a little bit earlier because of that last early week. But I thought it looked really good for Dabi. One thing that is clear here, though, is that Dabi is breaking apart. I don't think Dabi survives this. He's already in funeral gear. He thinks he's gonna die. I don't think he's making it past this. I think like the commenters know. I think that Dabi's gonna go down in a blaze of glory. I think he's gonna go down laughing. He's not gonna let his family save him. He's gonna hurt his family all the way down to hell. Anyway, Dabi sets up that we're going to get the story of how he's still alive. So, yeah, I'm pretty interested in hearing that next week. Anyway, guys, I'm going to call it there. It was a pretty interesting chapter for me. I really enjoyed a lot of parts of it. But yeah, let me know what you thought down below. And till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.